That the problems of load shedding started under the ANC government and they're not going to solve it. In fact, it got worse under Mr. Zuma, who sent all our money with the Guptas overseas. But we have a solution to solve the electricity crisis.
According to the DA, especially from the mouth of Chris Pappas, Jacob Zuma contributed to South Africa's electricity crisis in a really interesting way. Let's listen to what he has to say about Jacob Zuma's connection to the electricity crisis in South Africa, and I'll be back for some interesting analysis.
Let's go to Mr. Pappas first with regards to the issue of energy and the insecurity issues that South Africa currently faces. Your solutions?
Thank you. I think it is important, though, that I address Mr. Mtolo's continuous amnesia in this province. He seems to be very confused. For a party that couldn't even put 30 people to come together at this particular event, it's very brave of him to say that he's going to win. But let me answer the question. So we know that the problems of load shedding started under the ANC government and they're not going to solve it. In fact, it got worse under Mr. Zuma, who sent all our money with the Guptas overseas. But we have a solution to solve the electricity crisis. And that is to bring on board more independent power producers to our grid, to let go of some of the generation capacity at Eskom, because it is not working. It is costing us billions and billions of rand to keep it going, and to bring on board independent power producers, to deregulate the energy sector, to allow a greater blend of energy to be produced, to get our industries working, to get tourists back because the hotels will have electricity, etc. The other thing that we need to do is that we need to ensure that this blend of power that we're going to supply to our grid, we allow municipalities, we allow lower levels of government to more easily buy, more easily wield through the network. At the moment, the regulations around the electricity network are so hard to navigate that it is impossible for sufficiently capacitated governments to be able to produce their own electricity, wheel it through the Eskom network, and supply municipalities like eThekwini and others. Right. So let's introduce independent power producers, a mixed blend of energy to our system, and make sure that we have regular updates of our integrated resource plan. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Twala.
Yeah, so what do you guys think? For me, I think for this analysis, I'm going to begin with a really interesting study by the Academy of Science of South Africa, which has made a statement on the electricity crisis and what it's called the just transition. So the just transition is a transition of electricity sourcing from green technologies rather than coal, which has been a really major source of electricity in South Africa. So the study actually revealed that in the first month of 2023, that the intensity of load shedding increased from an already significant number of days in the year to occurring almost every day. So load shedding in South Africa became a daily occurrence, just like in Nigeria. In Nigeria, it's really intense that there could be days without electricity. And so a lot of people now resort to, what the solar panels and the use of the sunlight, which is very expensive. Not all people can afford that, but that's a really interesting phenomenon right now across Nigeria, okay? And it says here that the research says that the absence of a reliable electricity supply in South Africa has an ongoing devastating impact on South African society and an economy with hundreds of thousands of jobs being lost, while many more have been compromised. So this has had a really large impact on employment. Load shedding has had a major impact on unemployment, which is increasing in dramatic rates in South Africa. And it also says that in 2023, the President Cyril Ramaphosa declared that the energy crisis being experienced in the country constituted a national state of disaster, and that the new Minister of Electricity, I think that was Ramagokba, I think, was appointed in March of 2023 to replace Andrew de Ruyter of Eskom at the time, and he was tasked with implementing the National Energy Action Plan to end load shedding and focus on Eskom. Okay, Eskom's operational activities at the moment are now being administered by 3 ministries. So it's Mineral Resources and Energy, Public Enterprises, and the Presidency on Electricity. Okay. However, the issue now lies with the fact that a concept of a just transition then became sort of like a way to explain what has been happening with load shedding in South Africa. And the concept of this just transition emerged from the US trade union movement in the 1980s. And it was taken up by many international organizations, including the International Labour Organization, ILO, which defines a just transition to mean greening the economy in a way that is fair and is as inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. So this is what the just transition means. And when the concept of just transition was imported into South Africa in the 1990s, it was defined by a labor movement broadly to mean transformational change to create a more just and equal society. Okay, but since then the concept has been narrowed to refer only to an energy transition. This is where the problem lied. So rather than speaking about the transition to sustainability, sustainable growth and development to meet several indices, including the political, economic, social, technological, cultural, environmental indices that encompass what constitutes a functioning society, in South Africa, the just transition simply concentrated on being an energy transition. And that really hit Eskom really bad. And so it says here in the research that a just transition in South Africa has many aspects, among which an important public debate on just an energy transition, isn't workable. So here, the research also spoke about how the root of electricity crisis in South Africa lies in the complex issue around Eskom's operational, structural, and financial challenges. So these major internal challenges are compounded by failures in governance and a complex and contested relationship with government, okay? And also, he spoke about how the operational challenges in Eskom that resulted in a worsening of the electricity crisis in South Africa included a fleet of aging coal plants with other units out of operation, even the newly built Medupi and Kusile plant, with which former President Jacob Thabo Mbeki speaks a lot about. He gives details in his last speech during the 30 years of democracy, where he spoke about how during Jacob Zuma's regime, there were these Indian companies that had contracts to work on reforming the electricity supply in Medupi and Kusile, but because of this issue with BEE, they were unable to carry out that transition or whatever they had to do successfully, and as a result, Medupi and Kusile plants didn't kick off as was planned. But this research here refers to the fact that the weakness of the rebuilding at Medupi and Kusile led to a rapid decline in the electricity availability factor. So the EAF, it's actually the share of time that a power plant produces electricity over a period. And so a good EAF would be around 80%, right? So the share of time, which would mean a sufficient supply of electricity to the people where it's supposed to be serving, should have been 80% of the time. Okay, that would be what a good EAF should be achieving. But in Eskom's case at the moment, the EAF is actually 53%. So you can imagine the fall from 80%, with what qualifies it a good EAF, to 53%. And so it's unable to meet the time required to offer electricity to the wider people, the wider populace of South Africa, which means the fleet is operating just over half the time. Also, the research also speaks about how the building of two large new coal-fired powered stations in Medupi and Kusile experienced long delays and overspending, which are typical of major projects everywhere. And in South Africa, these problems were compounded by corruption and mismanagement, what Cyril Ramaphosa would speak about state capture, okay? So consequently, these new power stations were not constructed properly. They resulted in design defects and damaged units, and subsequently in power stations that have never operated at full capacity. So these were major problems that really gave rise to the deepening problem of load shedding. Now, one of the interesting points of the research here speaks about a little bit about Eskom's history as a national utility, and for me this is really interesting. So it speaks about how the fact that South Africa's existing grid at the moment, electricity grid, has been highly centralized and is supplied by 15 coal-fired power plants, 1 nuclear power plant, a smaller capacity of open cycle gas, renewable energy, and other sources. Okay, so these are the sources that supply the centralized grid at the moment, I believe at Eskom. But however, it says that the implantation of the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, REIPPPP, because of that, the infusion of this REIPPP, Eskom lost its monopoly status as a natural monopoly. So Eskom now naturally faces a lot of competition from other players, especially private investors in the electricity market. So it also says that during the several years that the Integrated Resource Plan was debated, IRP 2019, that limits were placed on how much wind and solar voltaics could be added. And this has been a kind of like a limitation to how far the shift towards a green transition could be, despite the fact that technologies rapidly have become lower in cost in South Africa and also in globally. So there has been a resistance, by what this research speaks about, a regime resistance. So there's been some players in the fossil fuel industry that have been resistant to large-scale deployment of renewable energy. So this clash has actually impeded Eskom's productivity to either revert back fully to coal or fully to a just transition. So there's been this clash between the shift, and that has actually impacted negatively on load shedding in South Africa. But anyway, one of the good reasons I like about this research is that it provides solutions. You know, one of the issues when we speak about Africa's problems is like we speak a lot about problems and not solution consciousness. So this research gives recommendations of what can be done regarding Eskom's demise, challenges at the moment. So it speaks about the need for an urgent political will to implement President Cyril Ramaphosa's National Energy Action Plan. So there's a lack of political will, probably because some cronies are actually gaining from the fact that load shedding exists at the moment, and some other cronies are actually gaining from the fact that renewable energy has been hitting a ceiling, and so that whole divide needs to be broken by a political will by all players to solve the energy crisis that South Africa is experiencing at the moment. Secondly, one other interesting recommendation here was the fact that the future electricity system in South Africa has to be decentralized, okay, both technically and politically. So in other words, there should be a cooperation between private investment and the national supply at Eskom, so that one can compensate for the other in situations or instances where there are certain lacks. The final recommendation, I think I really enjoyed this one so much, is the fact that it says that South Africa must address the threat that the electricity crisis is deepening inequality. So measures should be put in place to avoid having two economies of energy, one for the rich and another for the poor. So business and richer households should be encouraged to have more solar PVs or to move to solar PV rather than diesel generators. While for poorer households, solar PV needs to be subsidized, and maybe free basic electricity needs to continue or even increased. So this is a really interesting one, because the whole issue with load shedding at the moment has the potential to continuously increase the inequality that exists in South Africa, and can really impact the social capital, this whole social contract rather between the state and the society, which is defined as a basis and tenets and indices by which society and state have to function or frolic together to maintain the smooth functioning of society. And so if this inequality then tend to be increased because of the energy supply, where the rich are able to sustain themselves with solar panels, while the poor are unable to afford those, and then continuously look to radicalization and have more affinity to radical messages to be able to fracture what has been termed a fluid, functioning society in South Africa, because of their lack of because of the increasing exclusion and marginalization from the state and from resources and from service delivery, then that becomes a problem. And so it's really recommended that there should be a way to fight to make sure that the two economies do not emerge in South Africa because of load shedding. And I really enjoyed that recommendation. But this has been a lot of information. This has been a lot of things to think about. Chris Pappas has his own suggestions, as he spoke about in the video, but I don't know, what do you guys think about this whole thing, load shedding? Are we gonna see an end to it? Share your thoughts in the comments.